Peace, love, and light. This is your sister, Dr. Deanna Bailey, also known as Dr. Ma'at, going live to briefly discuss the origins of Thanksgiving. We call it Thanksgiving, but to the indigenous people of this land, they refer to it as a day they call it the National Day of Mourning. In fact, and let me get ready to share my screen with you guys. In fact, there was a plaque that was placed on Coles Hill in Plymouth to commemorate this National Day of Mourning, and it reads as such. Since 1970, Native Americans have gathered at noon on Coles Hill in Plymouth to commemorate a National Day of Mourning on the U.S. Thanksgiving holiday. Many Native Americans do not celebrate the arrival of the Pilgrims or other European settlers. To them, Thanksgiving is a reminder of the genocide of millions of their people, the theft of their lands, and the relentless assault on their culture. Participants in National Day of Mourning honor Native ancestors in the struggle of Native peoples to survive today. It is a day of remembrance and a spiritual connection, as well as a protest of the racism and oppression which Native Americans continue to experience. And this was erected by the town of Plymouth on behalf of the United American Indians of New England. Okay, so we call it, Thanksgiving, but they refer to it as a National Day of Mourning. And so in order to understand why the Native Americans or the natives of this land declared this day as a day of mourning, you have to know the origins of this alleged holiday. So anyway, the information disseminated in my presentation was or is extracted from the book, The African People and European Holidays, A Mental Genocide, which was written by our great ancestor, Ishakamusa Barashango. Please get this book. Right now, you're looking at book 1, and he has a purple book, which is book 2. So please get this book, family. African People, European Holidays, A Mental Genocide. This is book 1, but he also has another book, and it's called book 2. But please get these books. They are available at Everyone's Place. You can simply Google Everyone's Place in Baltimore. They do ship around the world, okay? And they are, I believe that they now, because he's an ancestor, I think that they are the ones who own like the publishing rights or the rights to print this book up, all right? Because when you open the front cover, they're right there. So please, I'm telling you, get this book, family. You gotta have it. It's a must-have, all right? So the information presented in this presentation is coming straight from book 1, African People and European Holidays and Mental Genocide. I would like to, before I begin, I just want to take time to honor our ancestor. I want to say Madupe Egungun. Thank you, Egungun, for producing a work that will assist us with breaking the chains of psychological slavery. May you rest in paradise, assured that your words and writings will continue to awaken those of us in the present and those of us, those who will come after us, and so on. Ashe. All right. So the general historical background of Thanksgiving is rooted in the Protestant Reformation in 1517. So if you want to understand Thanksgiving, you have to go back to the Protestant Reformation around 1517. And this guy right here, Henry VIII, he sparked the Protestant Reformation. And he sparked the Protestant Reformation because he was upset that the Pope did not grant him a divorce from his present wife. At that time, he was married to a woman named Catherine of Aragon. And the Pope did not, he wanted to divorce her and married a young girl named Anne Boleyn. And the Pope did not grant him the divorce. And so what he did was he renounced Roman papacy, which sparked the Protestant Reformation. Now, when we talk about the Protestant Reformation, we're simply talking about a movement of people who protested against the Roman papacy and proclaimed themselves to be purifiers of the European religion that we know today as Christianity. Okay, so he renounced Roman papacy and he set up his own church. They call it the Anglican Church or the Church of England. Okay, so he separated himself from the church. And at that time, remember, he was the king of England, and England at that time was being controlled by Rome. Because we got to remember that during this time, there was no separation between church and state, right? So whoever was the head of the church also controlled the state. Okay, so moving on. So Henry VIII, he separated from the Roman Church, and he opened his own church, the Anglican Church or the Church of England, and he granted his divorce. He granted himself his divorce, and he ended up marrying Anne Boleyn. Now, after Henry VIII died, his son Edward VI assumed the throne. Now, Edward was a sickly child, and he was lethally poisoned at the age of 16. When he died, Mary Tudor assumed the throne. Now, this woman was a pro-Roman, okay? And she set about revising the reforms put into motion by the English Parliament, all right? She revised the reforms put into motion by the English Parliament and her father, Henry VIII, which had politically and economically separated the English church from Rome. Now, while she was on the throne, 300 Protestant leaders were sentenced to death, thus earning her the title Bloody Mary. And until this, up until this, we still hear this woman's name, Bloody Mary. In fact, when you go to a bar, you can order a drink called the Bloody Mary. And Bloody Mary was the name that was given to Mary Tudor, for the massacre of 300 Protestant leaders. So we still hear her name, in the 21st century. So after she died, the Protestant Revolution regained momentum during the reign of Elizabeth I. Now, Elizabeth I brought about the Elizabethan settlement, which placed the power largely on the Protestant side. Okay. Now, by the end of her reign, the majority of the citizens of England were Protestant. However, there were Protestants who felt that the Church of England retained too much of the Roman papal dogma, and they sought to purify the church. And these people became known as the Puritans. And within the Puritans family, there were like three schools of thoughts. You had like the Methodist Episcopal Church, the Presbyterian Church, and the Congregational Church. All right. Now, when James I, some people call him James Stewart, when he came to throne in 1603, 1,000 Puritans petitioned him to inaugurate their reforms that they advocated, and he refused to do so. And so as a result, an era of prosecution occurred. Now, during this era of prosecution, Puritans fled to Holland. And I don't know if you guys can see my mouse right here, but there were people who fled England, and they went over to Holland. All right. And historians even called them pilgrims. So that's where you kind of hear the word pilgrims, because look at this. A pilgrim, by definition, is simply a person who journeys to a sacred place, it says, for religious reasons. Why they chose Holland, I don't know. I didn't do that much in-depth research on that. So I don't know why they specifically chose Holland to sojourn to, but that's where they went. And so historians even call those Puritans pilgrims. All right, so moving on, around 1620, the leaders of the Pilgrims decided to migrate to the New World. Now, remember, Christopher Columbus, we're not going to say he discovered, but we'll say that he traveled to the New World around 1492. So Europeans, they were well aware of what they called the New World. They were well aware of this by, 1620. So anyway, 1620, the leaders of the pilgrims decided to migrate to the New World. Now, these pilgrims were financed by English merchants. Okay, so around September the 6th, 1620, Barashango tells us that Mayflower set sail from Plymouth. Now, you're looking at a map of the UK, and Plymouth right here is at the south. It's at the bottom of the UK. Okay, and so on September the 6th, 1620, the Mayflower set sail from Plymouth with 41 men, their families, and 15 male servants which totaled 102 people. In some documents, they say 104, some say 106, but around 100 people, okay? Now, it took them 66 days to reach Cape Cod, Massachusetts, all right? But I want to make a note right here that their target was Virginia. They were actually headed to Virginia, but they end up landing in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. I also want to add that it was 2 ships that were supposed to leave Plymouth. The other ship was called Speedway, if I'm not mistaken. I don't have my notes in front of me, but if I'm not mistaken, the other boat was called Speedway. And when it set sail, something happened. And so they end up turning back around. Both ships end up turning back around. Speedway stayed, and the Mayflower set sail again. Okay. And so it was 66 days that it took for them to reach Cape Cod. So let's do the math, family. They left on September the 6th, 1620. So that means that if it took 66 days, we're looking at roughly 2 months. So around November the 10th or 11th, they landed, or they reached Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Now, before they disembarked, they created and signed what's called the Mayflower Compact, which was essentially a social contract in which the settlers consented to follow the community rules and regulations, they say, for the sake of order and survival. So many people call this the first framework of government written and enacted in the territory that is now called the United States of America. Now, let's get into some meat, family. As soon as the Pilgrims got off the ship, one of the first things they did, and this is coming from our ancestor Barashango, one of the first things that they did was that when they disembarked, was that they stole corn from the natives. So they got off the ship. The first thing they did was steal. Okay. So they were involved in looting. That was the first thing that they did. So let's get in, and I'm here to tell the truth about the Pilgrims. We got to tell the truth about the Pilgrims. So they stole from the natives. All right. Now, the first winter in the New World was extremely harsh, which resulted in a famine. All right. It resulted in a famine. Now, during this time, the Pilgrims, they indulged in cannibalism. They ate their wives. We're told, and I actually have their firsthand accounts in the book, African People in European Holidays and Mental Genocide by our ancestor Barashango. Firsthand accounts of the governor, saying that a famine came about and people ate their wives. They even kidnapped some of the natives, and they ate them as well. And throughout their writings, you see that they referred to the natives as savages, all right, because these natives weren't Christians. So because they weren't Christians, they were considered beneath them. They were considered savages, all right. And so they, when they were here during the first winter, they looted. They were involved in cannibalism. Dr. Barashango tells us that, in fact, at the first Thanksgiving, which took place, a year later, there were only 6 or 7 people at the first Thanksgiving. He also tells us that half of the people survived. So 100 people came over, but half of them survived, which brings the number down to 50. And he said that at the first Thanksgiving, there were only 6 or 7 mentally sane people at that first Thanksgiving. All right. He also tells us that the Pilgrims engaged in drunkenness, uncleanliness, and also sodomy. He said they also enslaved and abused the natives. All right. So this is the stuff that was going on. And this is the truth about the Pilgrims that we didn't hear in school, because many of us, when we matriculated through the school system, we were indoctrinated with like this idealized image of the Pilgrims, and it wasn't true. All right. So moving on. So they survived the winter time. So they got there fall of 1620. They survived the winter time, and around the spring, they met some indigenous people who taught them how to plant corn and where to fish. So on July the 30th, 1621, they celebrated their survival through the harsh winter. And in the autumn, the governor at that time, his name was William Bradford. He issued a proclamation calling for a Thanksgiving celebration to commemorate the gathering of the first harvest. And this is a picture that's widely circulated on the internet of the actual first Thanksgiving. And then so the rest is history. Around 1863, you had President Lincoln. He established Thanksgiving as a national holiday to be celebrated on the fourth Thursday of November. And then in 1939, President Roosevelt, he moved Thanksgiving, the Thanksgiving holiday, to the third Thursday of November. And he said in hopes of boosting retail sales. All right. So this is why we celebrate Thanksgiving. This is the origin of Thanksgiving. And so I told you I wouldn't be before you long, but I know that I was strong. I want to read the words of our ancestors before I close out. And I'm looking for it now. Okay, I'm on page 17 of African People and European Holidays and Mental Genocide. Egungun Barashango says this. He says, many feel a sense of horror when they reflect on the fact that in this land there once could be seen millions of teepees and centers of creative artistry stretching all the way from the extreme south to the extreme north of the continent. At one time, a virtual heaven on earth with its gold-rich 7 cities of Cibola, an abundance of other ori deposits in the west, dotted with myriads of African settlements, such as those, he called them African settlements, or I would call it the indigenous settlements, such as those of Olmec, Mayan, Incan, and Aztec to the south, while in the north, with its clean and invigorating air, the inhabitants moved freely, partaking of the pure waters which flowed through its many rivers and unpolluted streams. This continent was once a place where herds of buffalo roamed 9 to 12 inches of topsoil, and the sweet esoteric melodies of flutes, drums, and chanting voices could be heard from village to village, city to city, and nation to nation. Now, some 200 years later, the buffalo, with the exception of those in the zoo or the ones you may find on occasional nickel, have all been killed off. The topsoil corroded to less than 3 inches, while the rivers and streams are polluted, and the air is often dangerous to breathe. As concerning the untold millions of indigenous inhabitants who once dwelled in the land, only a fraction of their genetic descendants can be found surviving today. Hold up, and let me go back to the ancestor. Let me go back to him, because I was reading the words of Barashango, so I should have had this slide up. But those are his words, and I want to end or close with his objective for producing his book, and something I charge all of you to do. So he says, one of the things among the many we must examine is the celebration of European holidays. Black people must ever keep in mind that these holidays are tributes to European American nationalism, that is, white nationalism. Generally, holidays had a special political and cultural significance. In short, they are institutions of the mind, and as such can be, and most often are used as control mechanisms. One of the sacred purposes of this series is to help redeem and safeguard us from mental genocide. That is to say, mind destruction, by showing the other side of the coin, the other side of the moon, if you will. In these crucial times, we must move from one-dimensional to three-dimensional thinking. That is, thinking with the mind, the body, and the spirit. Though parts of this book are very emphatic and brutally frank, it is not intended from a hateful point of view, but rather from an underlying love for our people and an intense desire to seek out, find, and make manifest the truth. Another major objective of this series and the information contained therein is to help restore African people to their natural minds, for it is obvious that something and someone is constantly tampering with our minds. Therefore, we invite you to open your minds up for real thinking. Participating in European political cultural holidays is destructive to the true nature of African genius, the genius that laid the foundations of the world. Family, I know a lot of us will justify it. You'll say, Dr. Bailey, I'm not celebrating the genocide of another group of people. I'm just gathering with my family and, and just having a good time, over a meal. Well, my question to you Why do you have to gather on the third Thursday of November? Why can't you gather on another day to kick it with your family over a meal, right? I charge you guys, and I'm getting ready to close out because I said I wouldn't be before you long, because I know many of you guys are probably on your way now to your family's homes to celebrate Thanksgiving. But what I want you to just think about this: why can't we just create our own holidays? Our own holidays that celebrate us, holidays that celebrate the achievements of our ancestors. Holidays that have some historical significance to us or for us. Why can't we do that? So I'm gonna let you guys go. I love you. I said I wouldn't be before you long. I wish you a blessed day. Peace and Black power.